Today we're taking a look back at Scavengers, a PvEVP game that mixed survival with battle royale aspects. Set in a deep winter environment, players had to survive against the weather, animals, NPC foes and groups of other players in order to gather the most resources and escape the battlefield with a large spaceship at the end of the match. The PC version of Scavengers released into early access on Steam and the Epic Games Store on the 1st of May 2021. This however was more of an early access in name only, and could be seen as the full launch of the game instead. The previous closed beta, on the other hand, would be the real early access. There are plenty of reviews on the PC version of Scavengers, but I'd like to talk a little bit more about the console version of Scavengers. PS4 and Xbox One didn't get this early access full release, but instead only a hidden closed alpha, starting around autumn of 2021. This however was also an alpha in name only. All matches in the closed alpha were being played with forced full crossplay with all PC players. Calling the PC version early access, but the console version in early alpha, doesn't make sense if the versions are identical and all players are participating in the same matches. This structure was problematic for a couple of reasons. All of those reasons are in regard to balancing, which unfortunately was probably Scavenger's biggest weak spot. Forcing full crossplay, instead of only making it optional between PC and consoles, is already controversial and less than ideal, if we only consider the differences in input type. Scavengers also gave a big benefit to veteran players who had granted enough resources for a very powerful loadout of weapons and armor. Veterans could then craft this much better equipment during their matches, while new players got significantly worse equipment. This was probably one of Scavenger's main reasons for failure. Since the console version was released much later than the latest progression wipe of the PC version, new console players didn't only have to play against teams of players with a mouse and keyboard advantage, but the PC players also generally had much better weapons. This was an absolutely horrible decision, and the devs didn't do anything to change the flawed progression system. New players on console and PC alike were scared away by the unbalanced progression system. I remember certain teams only doing the minimal looting and then starting to actively hunt all human players on the map. It was a real bloodfest. Competition is obviously intended in a PvP game, but it has to be at least somewhat balanced. Some players being able to craft legendary equipment early on and others having to collect trash weapons is not fun for anyone. The other big flaw of the console version was obviously to hide it in a closed alpha. You could not find Scavengers anywhere on the PlayStation Store or the Xbox Marketplace, and instead had to sign up for a key on the website of the developers. If you wanted to get a higher player count, then this was possibly the worst way to do so. Nobody would be looking on the website because no one has ever even heard of it. Console players were sharing matches with PC players anyway, so they should have just released the game openly on PlayStation and Xbox too. The player numbers would have certainly been much higher, and the game would have surely survived at least longer than it ultimately did. When they closed the console alpha in June 2022, a couple of months before the game shut down on PC on the 16th of December 2022, they told players on Reddit not to worry about potential progression and character wipes, and assured players the console version would return in the future. This proved to be a lie. Even though one might claim they kept the claim about the future wipes, overall, if you never release again, then you obviously don't have to wipe anything. Before I talk about the strengths of Scavengers, I like to address some of the other most frequently managed criticisms of the game. A point of criticism I agree with is the lack of PvE modes. Scavengers allowed you to play your first two matches as kind of beginner PvE matches. Those matches functioned pretty much the same as the regular matches, only all PvP elements were deactivated. Other human players could participate in the matches, but human players couldn't hurt each other. This was a clever way to introduce new players to the gameplay concept of Scavengers. After the first two matches however, this PvE mode wasn't available anymore. The only pure PvE alternative was a short-term LTM called Horde mode, which for unknown reasons was removed pretty quickly. Having a permanent PvE alternative to grant resources would have probably helped to retain a much higher player base if you consider that many players got scared away by the horrible balancing in Scavengers. Two other common complaints were the game being pay to win and the gameplay being too generic. I have to somewhat disagree with both points. Crafting better resources or more powerful weapons and armor had a crafting time of multiple hours till a full day. These crafting times however could be eliminated by paying with real money. This was definitely a douche move and very annoying, but I wouldn't call it pay to win. All resources still had to be guarded in a match, and neither weapons nor resources could be straight out bought. An annoyance for sure, but I had much bigger beef with the awful progression system and balance in general than with this monetization aspect. If they had changed the system later on so that you could have just purchased resources with money, then I would have agreed with the critics. The accusation of being too bland is often being mentioned by fellow reviewers who simply seem to assume that an unsuccessful game must have been too generic to stand out of the crowd. I've heard this complaint both mentioned for Scavengers and for Hyperscape for example, and totally have to disagree in both cases. Scavengers mixed Battle Royale with survival elements, and I don't know many other PvEvP games who do that. The Cycle would nearly be the only somewhat similar game to the Scavengers gameplay formula, and that one certainly differentiates itself from Scavengers. Scavengers is obviously a third-person shooter, so gunplay will feel somewhat similar to other third-person shooter games. I however don't see how this could be enough to be classified as generic, but each to their own. Now to mention some positive aspects of the game. I like the map and general gameplay formula of Scavengers. Fighting animals, mobs and even boss NPCs in order to loot resources and weapons as a preparation for the mayhem between players was a really cool idea, and it certainly kept me engaged. The map really had an Arctic feeling and was quite immersive in being a very natural winter landscape without the artificial theme park elements we see in so many other games. The cold meter, which showed the degree of your player freezing, was also a nice touch and reminded me of the Darwin project. The big difference being that there were natural ice storm elements in Scavengers, which not only looked nice, but also forced you to seek a warm shelter till the storm passed. The gunplay in Scavengers was overall well done. Automatic weapons, as well as bows or melee weapons, all felt exciting and neither seemed in general too overpowered, only the crafting could heavily unbalance them. Movement was even better. Sliding down a snow hill was extremely fluent and satisfying. Scavengers used a hero system with characters similar to games like Apex Legends or Rogue Company, which means it wasn't a real hero shooter like Overwatch or Paladins, but instead gave players unique abilities and strength in addition to the general gameplay, which was the same for every character. I would neither call the decision for hero-like characters a big strength, nor a real weakness. It was okay, and I at least managed to unlock all characters in the game within a few months through daily login bonuses alone. This is also not the case for every free-to-play game. Scavengers also had some battle passes, but they are not really worth talking about. Some of them featured a couple of cosmetics, but one of them primarily consisted of resources. It might make sense given the importance of the crafting system, but I just don't see anybody being excited by the prospect of getting 10 earth magnet materials on the next level. Scavengers could have been a great and successful game, but you can't be making too many mistakes without at least trying to correct them. The gameplay itself, I don't have too many complaints with. It might not have been the best in the genre, but it certainly would have deserved its spot in the crowd if they managed to launch the game much better, do much better marketing and actually listen to the player feedback and completely revamp the progression system in order to tackle the unequivocal balancing issues. A permanent PvE alternative would have also done wonders for the game. Nonetheless, Scavengers still managed to be a flawed but fun experience and a game I for the most part enjoyed playing despite its issues. I therefore give Scavengers a 7 out of 10. Thanks for watching the video, and I hope to see you in the next one.